Yat Eitene, Masan Nishne. This is Navajo Grandma again, and this time we're going to talk about records. This is really critical for you to understand. I want to set the record straight, and you know how I am. Remember the Yucca and the Yucca situation? Well, some of the Native Americans feel like they have more records than we did. They were appalled. There were several people that were appalled that I only had records up to 1843. They're like, oh my gosh, I have them all the way to, we have so much more. Well, of course, if you are in a Native American tribe and you're from the East, you are going to have a lot more records. You had, and this is what I'm going to talk about, okay? And there's such a difference in point of contact and the record keeping. And I'm going to read this to you. I put records, basically the Spaniards, the British records. We had Franciscan fathers, we had church, religious records, we had surveys, there was recorded records of Native Americans, the tribes, the land, water, geology, tax records, censuses were created. They were specifically kept and then taken back by explorers. Like they've taken them back to Spain, some of them taken back to England, and there are repositories that were created in Washington, D.C. The further west, the point of contact lessened and the records were a little less. Now, I'm going to quote David M Brooke is an incredible anthropologist who's written fantastic books about this whole area, the San Juan Basin, and here in Chaco and Chaco Canyon. And this is what he said: lost and destroyed archival documents and limits of human memory prevent us from knowing basically the details we seek. And I really appreciate his comment because, we weren't always given, you can go back and strive to procure documentation. And like I said, you had the first contact, people had all kinds of records. You could take it back to, there was intermarriages and things like that, where you could go back to the 1400s, if not to the kings and queens, depending on who you were married to. And your DNA went back there. Then the further you go west in the central area, you could probably go back to the 1700s-ish, maybe close to 16. And then when you come out here, look, we're in the 1700s, they're not written records. Basically, we have history back to possibly 1400s and on, but there was no written records. And so what we procure here in the West, basically in the Navajo Nation, is not as plentiful as if you were a tribal member in the Eastern Coast. So I hope you understand that. I'm going to read basically an interesting, and it's going to be quite a read, but it's really important for us to listen to. And basically it was written, and this is called The First Meeting Between Europeans and Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. And this historian was Peter Carroll and David Noble. They described the encounters, and this is so perfect for this. On an otherwise ordinary autumn day, shortly after sunrise, the Arawak inhabitants of the Caribbean islands noticed strange ships sailing on the horizon, much larger than their dugout canoes. As these ships moved closer and closer, they saw strange-looking people with light skins aboard, making odd gestures. The Arawak youths stood at the bank hesitantly, and then some of the braver men began swimming toward the mysterious boats. These strangers offered the Arawak red-colored caps, glass beads, and other curious trifles. In exchange, the parrots, cotton skeins, darts, and other items. Then the strangers drew out swords, which the Arawak, in ignorance, grasped by the blades, cutting themselves. It was a symbolic act, this inadvertent drawing of blood. For the Arawak and the strangers looked at the world from opposite angles, and both were fascinated by what the other was not. To the Arawak, the newcomers were so obviously different in language, dress, and color that the Arawak doubted that the Europeans were human beings. They believed very firmly, this is what Christopher Columbus said after his first voyage to America. Listen, that these ships and people came from where? The sky. Why would they think they came from the sky? Now, Grandma already told you about Jesus Christ and how he ascended here and walked and helped and blessed and healed and were around the Native Americans. So here it is. And again, I'm going to say it, that I with these ships and people came from the sky. That is what they believed. Other indigenous people react in similar ways to their first encounters with Europeans. Columbus and other Europeans had their own misconceptions. They mistakenly believed that the Arawak were Indians. And this misconception originated in Columbus's basic error, which he himself never realized, in thinking that in sailing westward from Europe, he had reached the Indies in Asia, which were the true object of his voyage. To Columbus, it was literally inconceivable that he had found previously unknown lands. Like other Europeans of his time, he firmly believed in the completeness of human knowledge what he saw. Therefore, he incorporated into his existing worldview, and the Native Americans thereby became, to the satisfaction of most Europeans, simple Indians. In describing the Indians, Europeans focused not on who they were, but on what they were not. Then they went on to describe what the indigenous peoples did not have. Amerigo Vespucci, for whom the Americas were named, described the Indians as neither Muslim nor Jew. He noted that they were worse than heathen because we did not see that they offered any sacrifice, nor yet did they have a house of prayer. John Winthrop, an Englishman who helped found the Massachusetts Bay Colony, justified his claims to the indigenous peoples' land by arguing that they did not mark their ownership of it in ways that Europeans recognized. Now, I'm going to go back and make a comment here. Okay, so they're saying that Native Americans were heathens and that they had no house of prayer. Well, guess what? Hello. They hadn't come out here, had they? And there were other places. They had kivas. They had temples. And who did they worship? They worshiped Jesus Christ. He was their creator long before they came. Then the other comment that was made was that the Indians didn't mark their ownership of their lands. Oh my gosh, how degrading was that? No. You remember what my grandfather said when the Cattlemen's Association started sneaking in fencing. No, my grandfather was just furious. He said, these white people have to have, it's a mine mentality. This is mine, that's mine, this is not yours. Don't you dare cross that line. This is my house, this is mine. My grandfather wept many times and said, oh, that we had lived and were still living in the time where this entire land, Turtle Island, was completely without boundaries. Why? Because it belonged to everyone. Everyone harvested, everyone knew where the hunting grounds were, everyone basically had their sheep and their goats and their cattle and their horses. You ranged here. Everybody knew where to keep their animals and how to have them so that there was no erosion. It was incredible. And yet, the Cattlemen's Association started to stock basically took away all of this from the Native Americans because of erosion. Native Americans never did that. They knew how to plant and then to go somewhere else and to make sure that everything Mother Earth was recycling properly. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. He wrote that to enclose no land, neither had they settled habitations nor any tame cattle. Grandma just told you. Yes, they did. They had animals. They had livestock, and they took care of them. To newcomers, the indigenous peoples were not only backward, but also dangerous. In historian Ronald Takaki's words, they represented what English men and women in America thought they were not, and were important, what they must not become. Colonial leaders warned that colonists must strictly adhere to the laws and moral guidelines that define their communities. Otherwise, they would allow themselves to become Indianized. Increasingly, to be Indianized meant to serve the devil. It also meant to be decivilized, to become wild men. After all, the English viewed Indians as people living outside of civilization. Okay, Grandma's going to say something about that. Okay, we were serving who? The devil? No, we weren't. We were serving Jesus Christ. We walked with him. We talked with him. Our ancestors did. And all these horrible things, this is what happens. Who writes the history? That's what we're reading right here. Such ideas were rooted, at least in part, in religious beliefs, as Carroll and Noble point out in their description of Spanish explorers. Europeans in the age of Columbus saw themselves as Christians, the most spiritually pure people in creation. Please. This ethnocentric idea found reinforcement in the ideals of the Roman Catholic Church, which claimed to be a universal spiritual community. Yet, this ideology clearly excluded such religious different people as Muslims, against whom Christians had waged holy wars for centuries, and Jews, who remained outsiders throughout European society. Believing in a single unitary religion, members of the Catholic Church viewed non-believers as suitable either for conversion to the true faith or worthy only of death or enslavement. Whoa! Such religious attitudes shaped the Europeans' relations with Africans as well as Native Americans. Such attitudes were not limited to Europeans who were Catholic. They were shared by Protestants as well. Relations between the indigenous people of the Americas and the Europeans were also shaped by the fierce competition among European nations for wealth and power. As Europeans took control of more and more of the Americas, millions of indigenous people were killed. Countless others were pushed into the interior of both continents. Still others were forced into slavery. So basically, it is sad to hear. I really wanted to have you listen to that, because the description of we are holier than you, you're Indians, you're nomadic, you're animals, barbaric. I mean, if you look over there and you see Fajada Butte, the technology in that, even the white people to this day cannot try to mimic what they made there. These are Native Americans that told the seconds, the time, the dates, the months, the seasons, the moon, everything that was in creation. And yet they saw them as animals. And so not to drive a dagger into all of this, but this is how we were viewed. And to this day, there are people who really believe that. And I'm not I'm worth a lot. I have learned from my grandfather through oral history the records of my ancestors, because it was handed down from generation to generation to generation. And we knew Christ. And again, he walked among us. And we lived and we wanted to be like him. Looking at that, at the clock there, the incredible technology there that was created by the Native Americans or the Pueblos or many other natives, I'm sure, that were around here, came together. And Grandpa brought this up and he said, I think the reason why they made that is because they knew when Christ left, when he ascended into heaven, he said, I will return. And so their anticipation was, let's make a clock so that we'll count and count when he will return. Now, back then, they knew when he was going to return. But because of the way people are and how irreverent people are, that was taken from them. But many of our ancestors knew. Now, you read in the Bible and it says, in any scripture, no one knows the day or the time that he will return. But our ancestors were told. You look at that time. They wanted to be here. They were preparing their families. And they were a good people. So this is my take on this. The records came. We have the records. And like some of the information didn't flow because of history, the documentation. Basically, Brooke said that they opened a book and some of the pages, about this thick, just fell apart. But what they could get was the treaties of 1620 that the Spaniards made with the Navajo people. So there are records, but they're not specific family records. And that's what we do. We search, and I hope that one day we can, through prayer, go and procure documentation that exists somewhere, and we know it does. So this is Grandma, and I hope this kind of opened up your eyes about records and how people were, Native Americans were perceived, and how sad, and how we need to step away from that. And even Native Americans to Native Americans. I'm Navajo, or Dene, and I have so many horrible, scabby comments from other tribal members. That should never be. Never. And I just say, if you don't like what Grandma has to offer, please step away and do not invite yourself to our table, because we are the Navajo Grandma family, and Grandma loves you, and Grandma prays for you, and Grandma loves to teach you. And hopefully we can have some happy surprises and good things happen pretty soon. And summer is ending, and look how beautiful. It's the beautiful blue skies. The sun is shining, and it's lovely, and we're alive. And I hope you appreciate that. Smile and be kind to yourself and others. Thank you. Love you so much. I'll talk with you again, and we'll have another, basically another lesson. And we have a few before we start doing other things. And then I would like to start a little yummy recipe again. How's that? I'll see you later. Love you.
Go Coos.